Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to what I can offer you as a master coach. I can help you to focus on your why with clarity, uniting your passion with your purpose with a plan to create the life you truly desire. Book a free 20-minute coaching call right now via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson/call, and we can take it from there. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Mr. David Henson. How are you, David?
I'm good, thanks, Amy. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. So what is it you're doing at the moment, Dave?
At the moment, I'm sitting here talking to you, obviously, but in my working life, I am busy. I've been quite busy working on a number of different things. But like all of us, I think over the last, 18 months, we've all been through this situation and we're all having to, I don't like the word, but pivot our businesses, change what we're doing. So I've got a number of new ideas that I'm working on at the moment as well.
Sounds intriguing. Tell us more.
Well, I produce slide presentations, as you know, obviously, but for the benefit of the listeners here, well, I produce slide presentations. I design and produce presentations mostly as my main gig, and I also train people in how to produce better presentations, run workshops and that kind of thing. And I think the thing that I'm looking to do in 2022 is productize my business a little bit more. So produce products. Started working on an online course this year. Haven't got very far with it, I will admit, to be quite honest. There's a lot of work involved in it, but also other products that I can produce within PowerPoint, for example, that could be useful for companies and people in business.
And you touched there on something, Dave, which I just wanted to pull on, which was better presentations. So not just train people on presentations, but on better presentations. Tell us about the sort of distinction you're making there.
Well, I think when I say presentations, I think I try to encompass that as visual communications, which could mean a range of things, but it does mostly mean slide presentations. And when I say better presentations, you and I know, and everyone knows that most people, when they produce slides, well, they're not very good, are they? Let's put it that way. My book is called Your Slides Suck, and I think that probably encompasses my opinion of most people's slide presentations. So in a lot of cases, it's not difficult to tell people that I can make it better. In some cases, it may be a bit more tricky. Some people do actually produce half-decent presentations. But when I say better presentations, it's really about making your communication, in whatever form you do it, congruent with what you're saying and not clashing with what you're saying. A lot of people will produce presentations, visual communications that clash with what they're saying on stage or on screen. And if it's doing that, then it's really not doing its job properly. In some cases, it maybe shouldn't even be there at all. So my job is to make your presentations, your visual communications, work with you as a presenter.
So working with you, so it's like a companion that's almost like a partner.
Absolutely. This is something I've been saying quite a lot recently, that you could treat your slides as though they were someone else on stage with you. Now, if you were talking on stage or on screen, obviously we've been doing a lot of that over the last couple of years. If you were talking on stage or on screen with someone else, you would want them to be as good as you, as professional as you, as well turned out as you. And yet, if you look at someone's slides, some people's slides, some professional speakers' slides as well, they don't reach that criteria. They don't fulfill that criteria. Their slides don't act as a professional partner to them when they're speaking. So I try to get people to think of it in that way. If you want to up your presentation game, think of your slides as being your partner on stage. And then I think if you start thinking of them that way, you'll start working on making them better.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And designing, producing presentations, something that you've been working on at least for during lockdown. What were you doing before, Dave?
Do you want me to go back to when I first started work? That's many, many years ago.
Take us back to wherever you feels relevant.
Well, when I left school, I wanted to be a photographer. I joined a photographic company. I'll keep this short, by the way. I joined a photographic company and ended up going through their colour printing department and then into the audio-visual department where I produced slides. Back in the old days, 35mm slides. For anyone younger than the age of about 40, you won't know what the hell I'm talking about. But we produced 35mm slides. And I started my first business in 1986, which was called the Regent Slide Company. And I bought the computer graphics system for £7,500, which had 64 colours and 2 typefaces. And we used to produce the slides on this Apple IIe computer, which had 365k floppy disks, no hard disk, forget hard disks, didn't exist. And then we would modem the slides off to an imaging bureau. And the modem was 300 bits per second. Not kilobits, not megabits, not gigabits, just bits per second. Sounding really old now. And they would then send the slides back. And then eventually we upgraded and got ourselves a film recorder, which cost about £30,000, which produced the slides for us. But that was a really good business because people were starting to produce slides themselves in things like PowerPoint, although PowerPoint was quite late on the scene. And they would send us or modem us their slides, and we would then image the slides, send them back. I think we were charging something like £5.95 a shot. And we'd do thousands of these slides. So that was a good little business. But then, of course, when the projectors came along, that business went downhill very fast because people were not only able to produce their own slides, but also to project them. So we had to quickly reinvent ourselves over a period of a few years, I suppose. And to cut a long story short, I eventually got out of that business, sold it, and started up a web design business, which I did for several years. I was still doing some of the presentation stuff in the background for several clients. And it wasn't until I became kind of disillusioned with the web design business only in 2016 that I decided to give that up completely and go into becoming the slide presentation man full time. That probably wasn't as short as you was hoping, but...
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? There's an evolution there, but there's also a recognition of when you've had enough.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think we probably all go through those kind of cycles. I'd certainly had enough of working for a company in the early 80s, so I started my own business. That first business, although I sold it, I was growing weary of it towards the end because we'd gone round full circle in some ways that we were no longer doing what I set the business up to do. And then the web design business, I think with the web design business, there were several things, but one of the things that I was finding was that in my mind, and I don't have any fixed evidence for this, in my mind, it was becoming a young man's game. And I was feeling I was losing out on business because I was getting a little bit more senior, shall we say.
So your desire to be a photographer, did you fulfill that?
No, not a full-time professional photographer. It's funny you should ask that because one of the things I want to get back into again is the photography. And yesterday I bought myself a new camera. Haven't got it yet, but it's a nice professional camera, and I intend to use that not only for leisure but also for professional purposes. Anyway, I digress. No, I never became. Although I have done some professional photography, I never became a full-time photographer, and it would have been nice to do that, but I think sometimes life just takes you off in different directions, doesn't it? And the course that I was doing in photography was a day release course, and the photographic company I worked for allowed me to take that day off a week to do that. But at the same time, of course, I was working for them and quite enjoying what I was doing, promoted to supervise the department at the age of 19, and just enjoyed that work. It was quite a lot of pressure, but so I never really became a photographer as such.
And it's interesting because you said you sort of going off subject here, but I don't think you are. I think that this is the thing about purpose, is that it does reveal itself early on in life. It sort of shows you what your interests are and you bat them away, and then you come back to them later on again in life.
I agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think there's a lot of things that I was interested in when I was younger that I kind of think I'd like to get interested in again now. And the photography has always been in the background. Of course, with photography, it's so easy now because we have these brilliant cameras in our pockets with our phones, and they can do so much. I mean, I carry mine around all the time, and I've got a phone that has a very good camera on it, but I really have been getting the urge to get a decent camera with a decent lens. So I'm going to go back to that again, and I'm really looking forward just to getting out and about and snapping some pics.
And you mentioned leisure and professionally that you're going to be using this. So will you be taking photographs and being able to sort of sell them or use them in your presentations?
Yes, use them in the products I'm thinking of, and use them in the presentations, certainly. Probably submit some to picture libraries, probably the free picture libraries. The reason being is I feel slightly guilty because I've been using loads and loads of free images over the last few years and never really given anything back. So I think I should probably put a few pictures onto the onto the free stock libraries to repay them for providing me with quite a lot of images over the course of a few years.
That sounds wonderful. And I look forward to seeing them, because I know you've got a good eye for this thing. You've got that creative, artistic eye of knowing what's right and what's wrong quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think you learn that as a photographer. I learned that quite early on. You learn how to frame an image. You learn what makes a good picture. And I think I've still got that photographer's eye when I'm going about looking at things and taking pictures on the phone. I do enjoy that compositional aspect of photography.
Brilliant. So what's the purpose piece, Dave? Where does that figure in all of this?
What, the photography?
Yeah, or in your work, does it sort of feature more in the way that you approach your work?
Well, the purpose of my work as the slide presentation man specifically is to help people to communicate better. So it's just it's something that I don't like using the word passionate, because everyone uses that word, but I love the reaction that I get from people when you produce something that actually works for them, and they go, wow, that's, they didn't realize it was going to be quite that good, if I can say that without sounding big-headed. And I think one of the things that I also enjoy as a purpose is to get information across in a way that people can understand. And there was this really terrible graph last year that was produced by the NHS, which was presented by Boris and Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance. It was produced and presented at the end of October, beginning of November last year, when they were trying to justify last Christmas's lockdown. And this slide was supposed to show or illustrate the reason why they were locking down the country, and it was a terrible slide, and it was really, really complicated. And the reaction that people are going to have to that is one of two things. They're going to either say that's really complicated and scientific, therefore it must be true, so we'll do what the government says, or more likely they're going to say that's really complicated and scientific. Are they trying to pull the wool over our eyes? I'm not going to do what the government says. So what I did is I produced some slides that were a lot better and a lot clearer, and just focused on that message, and put it on LinkedIn. And a couple of comments on LinkedIn. It was like it got a lot of traction, and a couple of comments were to the were saying things like, "This sort of slide can save lives." And I thought, wow, that's a big ambition, isn't it, or a big aim to have, if a slide or a bit of visual communication can be that precise and convey the information in that way that it saves lives. Now, I admit most of the slides I produce in my day-to-day business don't save lives, but the point is your presentation should have an effect on the people you're presenting to, and if your slides just leave them baffled or bored, even worse, they're not going to have that effect.
Yeah, it's powerful. It really is. And there's that message of how the audience are left after you have, or whilst you are delivering your presentation. And then what they're going to do as a result of is what you're speaking about here. And visual imagery is so much more powerful, or can be sometimes, than the sort of audible message. So what is it that for you gets you up every morning in terms of communication and better communication?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I think this is probably true of a lot of areas of work. It's the feedback that you get from people. It's when you do a good job. So I suppose it's a bit like being a dog and saying, "Good boy, well done, good boy." But you know what I mean? It's that feedback you get from people, that appreciation that you get from people. I mean, I enjoy the whole process of doing it. I enjoy the whole process of talking to someone and finding out their ideas, finding out what their communication strategy and aim is all about, and then translating that into visuals, or in some cases, as you kind of alluded to just then, Amy, turning around to them and saying, do you know what? You don't need to use slides. Your communication is good. You're a good enough speaker, and the message you're trying to get across and the story you're telling does not need to be backed up with visuals. You can do it just by talking to your audience. And I'm quite happy to do that. If it might mean that I shoot myself in the foot and don't get the the business, but I'd rather be honest with the client and say to them, you don't need to use slides, than go ahead and produce something they actually don't need. But yeah, going through that whole process of talking to the customer, understanding their message, understanding what they're trying to say, and then converting that into a deck of visuals that they can use, and then getting that feedback afterwards when they hopefully say, "Wow, that's brilliant." That's probably the reason I do it, and for the money, of course.
And the focus has been a lot on your working life, and because you made that distinction right at the beginning and talking about how you've been working on a number of things, and we've been talking about the purpose of your work. Is there a separate world that you have purpose in, that you bring differently or approach differently to the working life side?
I've worked from home now since 2002. I've got an office, or a studio, as I like to call it, not a shed, but a studio in my back garden, which keeps work and home separate to a certain extent. And I've kind of the thing about my work is that I enjoy it. I enjoy it almost like a hobby. So I've reached the age now where I could semi-retire, and I am kind of thinking of doing other leisurely things. But because I enjoy my work, a bit like a friend of mine who's retired, about the same age as me, and he has his model railway, or as I call it, a train set, which really annoys him. But he goes up in his loft and locks himself away and works on this model railway, and this is kind of my model railway, my work. So to a certain extent, I define myself by my work. But yeah, there is a family outside of work. But I think working from home, even though I'm working out in my studio, does mean that there is a blurring of lines between your work and your home. Whereas before, when I ran my business, it was in central London, and I would get on a train, and there'll be this buffer between going to work and coming home. I quite appreciate that buffer. I miss it to a certain extent, because that was my thinking time. Or it was either my thinking time, or if I'd had a bad day, it might have been, get a can of beer and sit on the train and just read the paper time. But it was that nice buffer between work and home. Whereas now, if I've had a bad day at work, which doesn't happen very often, I'll just go straight indoors and I'll still be in a bad frame of mind. So I think that there is a blurring of work and life. But that's also a good thing to a certain extent, because it means that if I want to take an hour off now, not now because I'm talking to you, but if I want to take an hour off, I can just go out, go for a ride on the bike, go down to the coffee shop, and so there is this. It merges together to a certain extent, which I don't think is a bad thing. It doesn't stress me out. I don't mind taking my laptop on a holiday, and occasionally doing stuff. My wife doesn't go mad unless I sat there all day long doing something. But I might check emails in the morning, and it's not a problem. It doesn't stress me out to do that.
And what about fun? How do you bring fun into your work? Because I know you quite well, and I don't want to sort of share too much here, but
I think that's absolutely essential, bringing fun into work. I've always had a fun philosophy, even when I ran a business I had 10 people working for me. We always had fun. In fact, funnily enough, I've just started a podcast, which obviously you know about, Amy, called Putting the F in Fun, which is a complete diversion from everything else that I'm doing. But I'm doing it with a lady called Vicky Vaughan, and we have launched the podcast in the last couple of days. It's f-in.fun is the URL, and it's all about taking business topics of interest to people's lives, and dissecting them and discussing them in a fun and irreverent way, as we say. I think bringing fun to any part of life is essential. And I do it with, this is something about professional speaking, because we know we're both in the Professional Speaking Association. And it is mostly fun anyway. I mean, there's one or two speakers who are probably a little bit stuffy, if you like. Well, not stuffy, but probably take it quite seriously, very seriously. And I would like to see that expanded a bit, the professional part of it. Why can't we have fun? Why can't we be a little bit edgy? Is that a bad thing to do? Is that a dangerous thing to do? How far can you go with the fun in business? And I do like to have a laugh, but obviously that doesn't mean I don't take things seriously. I take my customers and their business very seriously indeed, and I make sure things are done to the best of my abilities. But have fun at the same time.
And it is important. I agree with you, Dave, and I bring a fun philosophy to everything I do as well, because you can be serious and take things seriously, but it is that. Just, you can't park all these separate emotions that you have at the door when you step into workplace. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think there may be some organisations where you are quite straightened. You're narrowed down, and it takes away your personality to a certain extent. And I think you've got to allow that to flourish, even to the extent where you may end up sometimes going over that threshold of acceptability. As long as you're told this is not acceptable, and as long as you accept, that. I mean, if you don't, if you say, well, actually, you know what, I think you're going too far with this threshold. This threshold is too low for me. Then fair enough. Maybe you need to find somewhere else to work. But I think you're right. I think there needs to be this. People need to be less scared of being edgy, without being. I don't agree that. Well, I don't. Obviously, none of us agree that we should go around offending people just for the sake of it. But I think there is a spectrum of what you can and can't, what you should and shouldn't say, and there's a spectrum of how people perceive what you should and shouldn't say, and how offended they decide to be about what you say.
And is that with the reason for the podcast, to sort of help not blur those boundaries, but just make them easier for people to have fun in their workplace? Yeah,
I think so. And as you know from discussions we've had, Amy, we're kind of going about this a bit back to front. We're just doing the podcast, Vicky and I, because it's fun to do, and we're going to see what audience comes up. And a lot of people won't like it. There'll be people that say, "No, I don't like it for one reason or another." It sometimes gets a little bit edgy, sometimes gets a little bit rude, but it also deals with topics which are interesting, and hopefully it delivers value as well. So that's the general idea. We'll see how it goes anyway.
Brilliant.
I don't think I'll be competing with you anytime soon.
Well, there's no competition in the podcast space. Honestly, no. It's incredibly welcoming and flexible, and everybody who's in the podcasting space is appreciative of other podcasters, and I think that's very similar in the Professional Speaking Association, is that we're all there to help each other, give each other a leg up, and realize that we've all started from scratch at some point, and so why not give each other a hand? So I was kind
of talking about numbers when I said I won't be competing with you anytime soon. I mean, I know that you're on like 240, and we're doing one a month at the moment, so if we did one a month, 240, that's 20 years, by which time I probably won't be here anymore.
Yeah, up your game.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to.
But no, the reason why I did so many partly was because at the beginning of lockdown, there wasn't much else to do. So I just ended up recording a lot more podcasts than I realized. So when I went to launch, I thought, oh my goodness, some of these episodes are not going to come out for 2 years if I just
Oh my
did
God.
one a week.
Yeah.
So it had to be that I upped it, and there was a large number of podcasts that got released, but it's been the most incredible project that I have
You've done a
undertaken.
fantastic job. It's been brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. And everybody's purpose is different. Everybody's doing things, and their reasons why they do these things are they're all unique, and that's what's so fantastic. And that's why I wanted to showcase, your story today about how you've come from being a photographer and how you've evolved. We can say pivot to a little bit of pivot. What's the word? Pirouetting.
Pirouetting, yes.
Yeah, a little bit of pirouetting here and there. But from the slides that you were doing originally to where the communication has evolved, what do you foresee? Where do you foresee people having this visual communication going forward?
That's a good question. I don't know how the technology is going to evolve. I guess there'll be plenty of systems or platforms that will help you to do things, suggest ideas and help you produce graphics, like Canva, for example. It does that, which is great. I mean, if it helps you to communicate better, then I've got no objection to those. The only thing that I don't like is templated platforms where you kind of try and fit your idea into a template rather than starting from, as I always suggest, even in PowerPoint, starting from a blank canvas. Because PowerPoint is rubbish in the way that it's designed, because it encourages people to just produce bad slides. It's got a bullet point template. Why do you need a bullet point template? You don't. Anyway, so I think that you'll probably get more of these sort of platforms. I don't know where else it's going technologically. I have to say I don't have a crystal ball to see where it's going. But I think that it's, from my point of view, presenting is all about starting off with, don't go anywhere near a computer. That's my advice. When you start thinking about your presentation, don't go anywhere near a computer until you've really honed down your message and your aims, and then you can start thinking about how you go about presenting it visually. It doesn't matter what tool you're using either. It doesn't matter if you're using, if a flip chart works for you, then great, use a flip chart. And if you want to use PowerPoint or Keynote or Prezi or Google Slides or any of the other ones out there, then great, use them. In my workshops, it's a full day workshop, and we don't go anywhere near the computer until after lunch. And one of the things that I do is, at one point in the morning, the delegates on the training course are using coloured pencils to design slides, because what I want to do is get them thinking visually using a script, rather than what most people would do with that script is they would just do a series of bullet points, and that is where I beat the bullet points out of people and just get them to think visually. And so, however visual communication goes forward in future, I don't think that principle changes.
Yeah, I agree. And the way you describe it, it is another art form. And it is like being an artist, just using a different medium to create the art that you're doing. And when you describe it the way you have, and how you can use the image or use whatever's on the slide to support you as your partner, it makes perfect sense that it is almost like dancing or whatever. You need the other person to be in synchronicity with you. It doesn't have to say the same thing. It doesn't have to be doing the same thing exactly, but it does need to support you. So if you're doing something, it's like a lift, it's the foundation for your speech.
Yeah, I like the word synchronicity. I use the word congruence, as I think I said the word earlier, but the slide has to be congruent. It has to fit with. It's like a hand in a glove or a jigsaw puzzle. What you don't want is to have any part of your communication clashing with you. So, for example, you just don't read your slides from the screen. That's rule number one. You can tell someone that in 20 seconds, as I've just done there. Don't read from the screen. Because simply the audience is going to try and read from the screen, and they'll be well ahead of where you are by the time you've finished saying what you're saying. and they get cognitively exhausted trying to read and listen at the same time. If you're going to put all your slides on, all your words on a slide, then put them on the slide, put them on the screen, say to the audience, here's my presentation, and while they're reading it, go and sit down, have a cup of tea. You haven't got to worry about standing up and presenting it. Or the alternative, as I always say to people, if you really need to have your notes on the slide as a prompt, absolutely fine, no problem, but don't inflict your notes on your audience. Unplug the projector or stop sharing a screen on Zoom and use your slides as a prompt. No problem with that. It's like having an auto cue, but don't inflict your slide notes or your auto cue or your script on your audience.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that phrase of being cognitively exhausted, because I think there's everybody who's listening right now will literally just like drop that shoulder and just go, oh, yeah, I've so been there. When you turn up to that particular presentation and then you see the first slide, you go, okay, here we go. Yeah.
Oh God, I know. It's just.
And how long's this talk?
Oh, I know. It's just. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been in an audience. I was at a talk at the Institute of Directors a couple of years ago before lockdown, and there was this guy. He was very good at what he did, but oh my God, his slides. And he said right at the beginning, he says, I've got 63 slides to present. And I thought, okay, that's not a problem. I don't care how many slides you've got. If they're all good, then that's great. But of course they weren't. And he was reading from the slides, and I was getting bored. In the end, I was looking at my phone. I think I was doodling with a pencil on a bit of paper. And I looked up thinking he must be getting near the end now. And his slides were numbered. And I looked up thinking he was getting near the end now. And he was on slide 27, so he wasn't even halfway through. And I thought, oh my God. So yeah, I switched off. So I don't know what he was talking about in the end, which is such a shame because, as I say, I'd seen the guy talk before, not on stage, but, in networking. And I knew that he was good at what he did, but he didn't convey that in that presentation.
And does your business cards simply say your slides suck and just pass them around to people, Dave?
It says on the back, it has a picture of the book cover, your slides suck. Yes, it does, yeah. I don't normally hold it that way up because that could be a little bit insulting. Yeah, I mean, the title of the book is edgy on purpose. But of course, if I'm dealing with a customer, I'm a lot more polite than that. I would tend to say to them, look, I think your presentation could be made more effective. And more often than not, they will politely answer me. One or two people have turned around and said, "No, I think my slides are fine." And if that's their opinion, then great. I'm not going to, I can't force them to up their game, can I?
No, not at all. So, in terms of upping your game, you shared that you're going to productize some of your services, that you might take some more days off now that you are edging towards semi-retirement and doing some more photography. Anything else that's on the horizon for you? A book number 2?
Well, funny you should say that. I had absolutely no ambition to do book number 2, but one of the ideas I've got for next year, which I'm just going to keep under my hat for the time being, might prompt book number 2. But this is all to do with, I'll tell you a bit about it. It's all to do with producing kind of, what do we call it, entertainment or games, but using a visual medium such as PowerPoint. So you may have heard of slideshow karaoke, for example, where people have to stand on stage and speak to a set of slides that they've never seen before. So that's one of the ideas. So producing slideshow karaoke slide decks that people can purchase for conferences and events, and other types of visual games, quizzes, that kind of thing. So it's kind of an experiential process that people, experiential speaking, as we both know Jackie Barry, who's produced a book called Experiential Speaking, which is brilliant, all to do with icebreakers and games and diversions that you can use from stage. I'm just taking that into the visual arena to a certain extent.
That sounds wonderful, and I'd love that because slideshow karaoke is one of the best games to play. It is so much fun and incredible just how brilliant some people are and some people aren't. So amazing. Dave, I'm really looking forward to book number 2. You're going to have to fulfill that promise now.
I shouldn't have said it live on your show, Amy, should I? Now I've gone and put myself in a position where I just have to do it.
Yeah, well, why not? When there's a demand for it, it's a case of absolutely, that's what you're
Mm.
doing, is supply and demand. Dave, it's been a pleasure talking about all things slides with you. And I know for sure your slides definitely don't suck. So thank you for bringing your expertise to the space. How would people get in contact with you? Where's the best place for them to reach out?
My website is www, of course, .theslidepresentationman.co.uk. Quite a Ron Seal kind of name. That's what it says on the tin. And if you look up David Henson on LinkedIn, I think it's David Henson Presents, my URL on LinkedIn, if I remember rightly. I'm on there. Love to connect with anyone that wants to do so. So yeah, those are the main two ways of getting in touch.
And tuning into that podcast again.
Of course, tuning into the Putting the F in Fun podcast as my side project.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'll make sure all of those links go into the show notes. So thank you for those. Dave, thank you again for coming on Focus on Why. Please share with the audience some final words.
Well, audience, if you ever are a member of an audience sitting there watching a slide presentation that is boring you to death, making you want to gouge out your own eyes with a rusty spoon, you know where to come. But you know you're not alone. I am on a mission to try to banish bad visual communications. I'm doing my best. It's going to be a long job, though.
Thank you for listening to Focus on Why with me, Amy Rowlandson. To show your appreciation and to help other listeners understand what value you have received from tuning in today, please leave me an Apple Podcast 5-star review. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the inspiring, uplifting and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.